So let me know if you're there. I'm trying to do a live stream on the issues of our day connected with Chatgtp and the lot. I'm just checking on the computer to see this is online. So if any of you are there, well, I don't see nobody there yet, so I won't say anything until such time as I know this is working properly. Yes, it is working. Okay, so how do you do? I'll see if I can put the chat function on here as well. Yeah, I've got it on. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of research on this, firstly on the Chatgtp, on AI, and then on, okay great, and then on Deepseek. And of course the Deepseek thing is hilarious because it is a fundamental destruction of the model proposed by the United States of America. But it's much more than that. I've been looking at a number of different areas in which you could use Deepseek and Chatgtp actually for investigating stuff, publishing stuff, doing research, getting your work done and so on. So there's going to be quite a shift in what I'm going to be doing over the next period based on the use of AI. I'm not a Luddite. I think that the AI opportunities that are provided by these large language models will enable people who are determined to bring about change to increase their influence and power and challenge the existing order. Now, of course, you know, any query that you make to Deepseek or Chatgtp or any of these AI models that might allow you to understand and to take action on particular issues, you've also got to understand that the opposing side could do the same thing. So let's say you make a model. I want to know how to run a campaign against the British government on the issue of homelessness, yeah? And you could work out, let's say, set some parameters for that in your local area. Let's say I want to do it in southeast London. And then you can keep doing proposal and feedback, until such time as the answers that are given to you provide you with a mechanism to actually carry out the task you want. And then you could say, like, you know, design a website to do this, suggest a mechanism for promoting that website. How would the website structure look? And I've done this, for example, with the website markswalks.com. Let me give you a bit of background, because this is sort of one of my pet loves or fetishes has been over the years to use computing and the internet as a means to develop political activity and analysis. So I started out in the early 1990s by collecting research materials published by the CIA called the Foreign Broadcast Information Service. They're called FBIS. You can look up on Wikipedia what that is, FBIS, Foreign Broadcast Information Service. And there were two services. One was called FBIS and the other was called SWB. And SWB is Summary of World Broadcast. And what they basically did was they were intelligence reports from open source material from all around the world, run by GCHQ in Caversham, BBC come GCHQ, they're actually one and the same thing, and the CIA. And the CIA in Arlington, Virginia would monitor the news everywhere in the world. So you've got to remember, at that time, internet was extremely restricted. The availability and use of it was extremely restricted. And so what they used to do was they would have people who would literally sit there monitoring the radio, television, news in every country in the world. And they would collect their news and information, local, regional, everything like that, translate it into English, and then produce a summary of that, which would be, in the SWB, the British BBC version, was a summary of about 20 to 30 pages, just dense text, maybe you know, like the Economist magazine, maybe a bit like that, but without the images. And the American version would produce 5 documents a day. So they had one on what's called Central Eurasia, one on China, one on Sub-Saharan Africa, one on the Near East and South Asia, and one on South America. I know they had one on Eastern Europe as well. And maybe Southeast Asia and Oceania. In any case, it was everywhere in the world except for the United States of America. And they used to basically just break the copyright and publish the material. So through this, what I used to do is, because I wanted to get access to this information, I used to purchase from the United States the CIA's documents, and I would export them to England once a week. I would sell them on to the Chatham House, for example, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. I got them as a contract, to the School of Oriental African Studies, 2 different departments there, to School of Slavonic Studies, and so on. They then went online. About 1998, they went online, and I was heavily involved in that transition from paper to electronic information and the development of the internet. So what I did was I set up a training center to teach people how to use the internet for because I believe that in order to bring about a revolution led by the working classes, you would have to have an educated population amongst them, trained and educated in theory of revolution and understanding the nature of the existing order of society, in order to be able to counter it, form their own analysis of the world, challenge the existing analysis of the world, and build movements that were able to break the power of the ruling classes everywhere. Now, this was the theoretical foundation upon which I tried to do this work, and then we set up a training center to train. We trained about 6,000, or tried to train about 6,000 people to use the computers and the internet. This was around 1998 to 2003. We had quite a big internet center in South London, and we had 4 different locations where we trained people to do this sort of stuff. So the idea was to be in on the internet as early as possible, and to use that capacity to influence the trajectory of politics in the world. That was the aim. I mean, it was quite ambitious, but I was involved in a group that had quite a big influence at the time, and so it didn't seem quite so ambitious. We did succeed for a time in getting somewhere with that. The problem was, as many people at the time said, you know, there's always a danger that too much information access undermines the authority and power of those at the top. Now, that happened inside the political organisation I was in. It was known as the International Marxist Tendency at the time, but it also happened in many other organisations. It happened within the. It really came to a head when, between about the year 2003 and the year 2010. The internet was still a relatively free domain. It was beginning to be conquered by a number of large enterprises, but it was still relatively free terrain. You had a number of initiatives that would come up that would like be free initiatives, like Napster, for example, where everyone just shared information around, and there were multiple search engines and multiple web browsers. For example, Firefox at the time was previously known as Netscape Navigator, and it was built in a way that was later became the foundation for the Tor browser and other sort of secure browsing systems that don't basically spy on you. But because of the strength of the corporate influence, they rapidly gained a dominant position. The big corporates purchased their control over the internet. And once they'd purchased that control, then they used that to create an unassailable lead, or an apparently unassailable lead, through their universalist control over the internet. So, for example, Google, I mean, you know they've got the universal surveillance, because everywhere you've got a map that will help you get anywhere. Well, to do that, they had to survey everywhere pretty much in the world. You've got Google World, which monitors the world and can be used to survey the world through satellites. They've got the internet access to everyone's emails. They know what every search you've carried out. And in that way, they gain profiles which they can sell to corporations or to intelligence agencies, governments, and so on. And hostile to you and me, forces that can control the narratives dominating in the world. So quite early on, I found out that the American military and the Chinese military were aware of the dynamics and trajectories of the internet, and so they began to discuss what they called information warfare. And information warfare was a conflict through information that would determine which power would control the society. And the basic argument was being made that every system of organization of power, whether it be an institution like a hospital or a corporation or a military agency or intelligence agency or whatever, has a particular format of power, a model of its operational functions. So who does what, who has the authority to impose what, who decides what, how is it worked out and carried out, and so on. And so once you model that, once you know how that structure functions, in theory you could interfere with its operation via some information warfare. So you change the information, you present something, for example, instead of me saying what I'm saying now, you interfere with it and you change the message I'm saying to something else while I'm saying it or after I've said it or something like that. So this information blockage, information intervention, transformation, and so this sort of thing. Now we call it sort of, deep fake and all that sort of thing. But essentially it was like interrupt the flow of a model and therefore be able to break it. And that's been a long time the aim of the intelligence agencies and the military when they discuss these questions right back at with the sort of birth of the internet, and particularly the birth of the World Wide Web. And there was a discussion in China by some military theoreticians, because the Chinese army was based upon something called the People's War. The People's War, from the time of the Liberation War in China, it was from 1929 to 1949, there was a war fought in China to liberate the country, both from Japanese occupation, which came a little bit later, but also from the Kuomintang, the nationalist forces that imposed their own dictatorial power over society. And the consequence of that was that the units of the Chinese, the People's Liberation Army, they would have to try to gain the support of the population where they were operating, because they moved around the country from one region to another, and they had to, as I think Mao Zedong used to say, swim amongst the fish. You become one of the people. And that theoretical model has been a powerful theoretical model inside the Chinese army throughout its history. Now, throughout its modern history, People's Liberation Army. So there was a unit set up, an information warfare unit set up in the Chinese army that was, they said, they declared their principle as people's war in the information age. So in other words, you would use information as a mechanism for subverting global imperialist influence and capitalism. Now, they're not. The theory is good. The practice is, of course, the Chinese army doesn't have much contact with ordinary people around the world. It does in China, but it doesn't have much contact around the world. Therefore, its ability to influence things is very weak. They sort of do symbolic things. So, for example, during the Hong Kong unrest a couple of years ago, there was a time when the authorities were planning to use or were accused of being ready to use force against the Hong Kong protesters, and by that I mean the Chinese authorities. And the Chinese army unit inside Hong Kong, you may remember, came out of their barracks, and the Western media reported it, and then they said, oh look, they're coming out of their barracks. So all they did was clear up the area, and then they returned to their barracks. So they weren't doing anything, but that was a little propaganda piece. So that's the sort of thing that Chinese have been doing propaganda-wise to try and influence people around the world. But here we have something. Let's leap forward a little bit. Let me go through, try and stick to some theoretical timeline. So what happened was in around 2000, the time of the Arab Spring, these sort of rebellions that broke out. Some people say they were orchestrated. Some probably were orchestrated, but some were genuine. They certainly had genuine cause. And when they broke out, the internet was controlled by the. No, I'm not in the Intel world. All it was I purchased. You see, they sold these things on the marketplace. The American intelligence agencies, they sold these documents on the marketplace, and I purchased them on the marketplace from America and sold them in England. That's basically what I did. So I got what was called open source intel. And open source intel is just public information, but there's a skill to gathering public information, assessing it, and analysing it and using it. So, you know, it's like people, pundits who analyse the news today, research and do YouTube channels, all that, they're doing the same thing. It's just that I knew that there was this global systematic collection of data carried out by the CIA and the BBC, which most people didn't know about. And so because of my research studies, my particular interest in China, at the School of Saronic and Eastern European Studies, I discovered these documents. Actually, my professor, who was called David Shamble, he showed us the documents, and that fascinated me, you know, that you could sort of master the control of all the news and media in the world. In fact, there was a woman that I met in Shanghai in 1991, and she was working at the French embassy, but she had... Oh, no, that's not her, sorry, it's not her. There was another woman I met in China around that time, 1991, American woman. She'd worked for the CIA, and she told me that they literally listened at the time, early 1990s, they listened to every conversation, every phone call in China. No, there weren't all that many phone lines. There were about, I think, 10,000 phone lines at the time. So the Americans used to record all of them, and then they'd give people like her, who was an expert on Chinese translation. She would be forced to listen to, you know, really crackly and poor quality Chinese from, you know, someone in Hunan talking to someone in Beijing with dialects, and she would have to like translate. Literally, they would translate everything that was being said in China on telephones. And so you get the sense of this sort of long-standing war and preparation for control of the information infrastructure of the world. Now, of course, you know, you could go onto Chatgtp now or Deepseek, and you could say, how could I design a system for monitoring all telecommunications discussions between government agents in Britain and you know, the public associated with the, let's say, the Department for Agriculture and Fisheries, and it will come up. You check it yourself. It will come up with a way in which you could do that. Say, if I was an Intel agent, how would I do X, Y, and Z? And it will come up with that stuff. And so, yes, it's all about the prompts, exactly. So I've done stuff. Let me just tell you some of the stuff I've been doing recently on the ChatGPT prompts. So what I said was, you see, China's economic development is phenomenal. Everybody knows that. Nobody disputes it. So, but Chinese government says it's a communist government. And so being a Marxist and a sort of proponent, the Karl Marx Walking Tour Guide, I asked, would it be possible to establish communism as in a society where you have sufficient wealth in abundance so that people don't require money as the mechanism for motivation, and that they engage in creative activity and democratically control the society. And include in that, by the way, and I'll post these chats. I'm thinking about doing it on the Substack, but it's become quite extensive, so I've got a huge reserve of material that I've now been working on for about 4 or 5 months now, that is all around these thematics, and so I'll try to figure out the most effective way to do this. Now, I've been quite surprised because when I ran what I did was I ran my PhD through the ChatGTP and said, you know, what do you think about this as an analysis of China, or how do you apply this methodology that I'd used in my PhD for analysing China, and it came out with exceptionally good results. Not only that, but it came out with statistical data that I hadn't been able to assemble and master when I did my PhD, but now you can do that sort of in a couple of clicks. So in any case, what I said was, would it be possible to establish communism in China by 2049? And if so, make a plan to do so. Suggest a plan to do so. Now, Chatgtp, I asked about this, and it did come out with some pretty good material as far as I'm concerned, because I'm familiar with the subject matter, and it is different as a plan, what they suggest, what you could do in order to achieve these things than the Chinese government is proposing. And then I said, well, what about if we use artificial intelligence as the mechanism for coordinating the economy, then you could arrange the economy in such a way that it gradually becomes dominated. The exchange between people and the production of things is arranged via blockchain and artificial intelligence. So rather than money being the mechanism of exchange, artificial intelligence becomes the mechanism for disseminating goods. What was it? Communism killed 100 million people, and all it got was a lousy unisex t-shirt. Yeah, well, I mean, I studied, one of the things I did in order to do my walking tours in Berlin, and then later in London, but I started in Berlin, was I learned all the jokes from, like, all the jokes about communism. So I literally know them all, and that's, unfortunately, that's not a very good one. But I do know all the jokes about that, and they were powerful mechanisms for questioning the authority and power of those in power inside communist states. Now, interestingly enough, the planned economy. You see, the planned economy in the Soviet Union was heavy industry, the drive to strengthen heavy industry and to push forward heavy industry at the expense of consumer goods and the peasantry, which did achieve its objectives. And of course, the things that Play earlier was complaining about, like 100 million people wearing the same clothes. In fact, 500 million people used to wear sort of Mao suit in the day. It's become quite a trendy thing, by the way, in Notting Hill and central London to wear Mao suit type clothes nowadays. But okay, this was because it was easy to make those clothes. During a period of industrialization, it's easy to make clothes that all look the same, and everyone sort of is all in it together. That was the sort of idea. In fact, you've got more variety in China now in clothing than you do in the Western world. You see the Chinese wandering around nowadays. They're all, very quite smartly dressed. They have more variety in clothing than we do. But that's a sideline in any case. So AI and the internet help solve the complexity. Well, that's the idea behind it. And if you look into this question, and I have done extensively, but you can all check yourself, and this is the beauty about it. In the past, whenever I was in some Marxist group or other, they would always, assert, we will do this, and people, because they believe, that, it'd be good to have a better world, to improve the lot of the workers, to change the balance of power between workers and bosses and this sort of thing. So, and people are involved in socialist movements and all the rest of it. And so therefore they tended to, give their authority to those within a party or an organization or the trade unions who then would often, diverge in their interests and in their operations from what you want. Whereas if you we're not in communism, and I'll come on to those questions a minute because I do understand where they come from. But the beauty about these AI systems is that, as distinct from this type of situation where you have a few people saying something to people and people go, yes, I agree with you, do it. Now you can check it yourself and reference it yourself and cross-reference it. Now I'll come on to the dangers of that a little bit later on, but first I just want to say the positivity of it. As I said, I'm not a Luddite. I'm a big supporter of utilising modern technology to facilitate the transformation of society. And you know, Lenin was famous for proposing that a revolutionary party should have sort of full-time staff and like a machinery of, you know, dedicated revolutionaries who would facilitate things. You know, and I used to be in what was called the militant tendency, and then when we were in the militant tendency, we used to always raise money to get people to set up a printing press. People who would go and visit people go and discuss with people go and run education classes, people would make printing stuff, people would fold the documents together and send them out by post and all the rest of it. Now, of course, all these type of things can be done by individuals with enormous leverage over the machinery to do these things. I never done computer programming other than HTML coding, but in the last few months, I've been doing Python. I've been doing what do you call it? What's these JSON things again? I can't remember. I don't even know what they call it. JSS, yeah, JSS. The Python is the one that I found most interesting, because once you get Python, you know, you ask it, how do I do this task? And the machine will say to you, use this Python program. And I say, write it for me to do X, Y, and Z, and it will do it. And then, but the Python thing, the funny thing is as soon as you click bang, it's done. So for example, I'll give you one example about the collection of information and and gathering and disseminating of it. So I've written about 150 articles for a Chinese website called china.org.cn. They haven't taken me back, despite my willingness to be taken back if I could get some cash. But somebody seems to have got a bee in their bonnet about me and doesn't trust me in China. So anyway, I wanted to gather all my articles together. But you know what it's like, you copy an article, you go to a web page, copy an article, paste an article, it'll be in one format, another format. So I said, like, can you make a program that will, if I drop in the web pages, that will extract the article, the actual article, put the headline underneath it, put the time underneath it, put it into a particular format, and then produce it as a Word document with the 150 articles. So yes, you go onto the, I'd use Chatgtp for that one. It did it. It took me a few hours to do, but now it means I can use the same program that we've already developed to gather news from all around the world. So the type of tasks that the CIA were doing years ago in terms of gathering public information by sourcing it like physically, I can now use a program on my computer that I've already developed in conjunction with Chatgtp to do that. So that's what I've discovered, and that's just one of the elements of that I also made. If you look at the website markswalks.com and all the variants in there, all of that was done by sort of banging back and forth between Chatgtp and myself. Now, in relation to the Chinese stuff, I went on there. For example, I posted on Substack this afternoon. I went on to Deepseek, and there I asked the question about SARS, you know, the whole discussion about COVID and where it came from and all the rest of it. And I have always argued that SARS came from SARS-CoV-2 came from SARS. Now, I know there are people who say there are no viruses, but if you assume there are viruses, then the theory of SARS becoming SARS-CoV-2 was rejected by everybody because, as I pointed out, the whole world has been told that SARS disappeared. Firstly, they were told that SARS appeared in 2002 to 2004, disappeared, and then vanished from the earth, basically, because of the measures taken. So I was always challenging that. And I provided evidence that the leading epidemiologists in China had argued that there were, well, he showed that the antibodies in Chinese children in 2010 to 12 showed 20% prevalence of SARS antibodies, and these were children who had been born after the disappearance of SARS. So how could they have SARS antibodies if they're born after the disappearance of SARS? And without it being inherited, they weren't inherited. And even if they were inherited, why would it be 20%? And of course, if it's 20% in Guangzhou had SARS antibodies, children, and actually earlier 2001 they say 40% of the children in Beijing had SARS antibodies. That means the infection fatality rate for SARS was next to nothing. And therefore, rather than being the 10% that they originally claimed, and nearly every scientific document says 10%, or the 3% that the WHO has amended it to, it would be 0.003, 0.3, something like 0.1 or 0.15. No different from flu, no different from, any of the other diseases that are supposedly like flying around every winter or in every flu season or cold season. And effectively the same argument should be made in relation to COVID-19, but the point being that, SARS-CoV-2, the point being that SARS-CoV-2, I said, based on Zhong Nanshan, he's the leading epidemiologist in China, I said in my Substack articles and in speeches at Speaker's Corner and elsewhere, that SARS is almost certainly an interaction between, SARS-CoV-2 is an interaction between SARS and animal and man and animal just moves around between things, and may well have been here thousands of years ago and just been circulating. And but everybody had said, you don't know what you're talking about. So I went on, I went on Deepseek and on Chatgtp, and I said, well, here is the evidence presented by Zhong Nanshan about antibodies in Guangzhou in 2012 from children born after the disappearance of SARS. Does that mean that SARS could have come from SARS-CoV-2 could have come from SARS? And they ended up saying yes, that it could well have come in that way. And so it's not about saying that these instruments and tools are telling you the truth. It's about questioning and cross-questioning. Someone said the prompt is you prompt and then you cross-question it, and you check up in the data you have from the real world elsewhere and go back to it and change it. So when I first said to Deepseek, could SARS-CoV-2 have come from SARS, it basically said, no way. The furin cleavage site, the discussion point that they go on about in America, or about the CIA goes on about in relation to the theory that SARS came out of a laboratory in Wuhan, they all point to this, there's a unique furin cleavage site that makes it more transmissible. But what if SARS was transmissible in the first place and that nobody was detected? And the way we know, the only way we detected was by taking PCR tests. Well, if you stop doing PCR tests, you don't detect. If you got a runny nose now, have you got COVID? Without detecting it, how do you know? And so that's the point, is that the SARS-CoV, the PCR tests were, a significant part. I better watch what I say now, because YouTube still functions on the basis of its nonsensical past analyses. So I've done enough on this stuff before not to have to do it. I'd have to cite the exact wording from Deepseek and Chatgtp on these questions to avoid getting censored here. So I'll just avoid that point here for the minute, so that we don't just get chopped off. Now, in relation to the to Deepseek now, and I asked a number of questions to Deepseek about this question. So I asked Chatgtp, would it be possible to establish communism by 2049? And it put forward a series of suggestions, including methods for democratic control through artificial intelligence and community powers exercised through blockchain and so on, so that you've got security and privacy as well as data utilization. And it did put forward, it's true, Piers Corbyn and others at Speaker's Corner, who I know over many years, and many people in the anti-lockdown movement also talk about the World Economic Forum and their plans for universal surveillance and ubiquitous surveillance, and the use of climate and the use of green issues to impose 15-minute cities and all that sort of thing, which there are certainly people who advocate that, and they're powerful people. But if you cross-question, although the dominant emphasis within Chatgtp will be to support that. For example, I asked the question of Chatgtp, could you present the strongest arguments in favour of the theory of man-made climate change, and then the strongest arguments against, and then when each of these arguments were put forward, I got them to break down again the strongest arguments for, the strongest arguments, strongest arguments for, strongest arguments against. And you end up, I ended up with something that I found quite convincing in the contrarian viewpoint. I mean, it was really quite overwhelming that I found I'm siding with that, I'm siding with that, I'm siding with that on pretty much every issue. But that doesn't mean you don't advocate mitigation measures, but that was basically what it ended up as. Now, Google have started giving AI results. Yes, that's true, but I didn't find them very useful. I found they're sort of superficial. And the interesting thing about the Deepseek issue is, you know, for £6 million, I mean, you know, £6 million is not all that much, much money. I mean, I don't have it, but it's not that much money. You know, a few houses in a street in London is £6 million, and Sam Altman, and Elon Musk, and all these people, their idea, these hyper capitalists, you know, the Magnificent Seven as they're called, the big corporations in America, based on purchasing the internet, which is what it was. You know, the internet was quite a free domain, and it was purchased, and the military facilitated that purchase in order to utilize it for spying. And that's what Ed Snowden revealed, for example, when he did the exposed PRISM. He showed that Google, Yahoo, and all of them were working together with the National Security Agency to spy on the world, including on world government leaders from different countries. So they were using all and that's why they gave them a free rein to do what they like. And the Chinese prevented that. Now, the Chinese attempted, in I think it was the year about 2008 or so, they attempted to create an independent. 2010. Some of the big companies from America were banned from China. So Google, I remember being in China at the time, and I tried to use Google, and it didn't work. You clicked on it, and you know, a circle of death kept ringing, nothing went there, and therefore what happened was that a number of big corporations, big internet corporations, got shut down. Did they float? I've seen some headlines. Did they float? No, they're not on the stock market. No. When they shut down the Western companies, they tried to facilitate Chinese companies taking over, for example, the functions of these companies. So, for example, there was a state-run search engine called Gke. I think it was Gke. And it was run by the People's Daily. It didn't actually work out well. They didn't manage to create a good enough search engine. But other enterprises, some private enterprises, were given rein in China, like Baidu and others, to replicate and emulate American-style corporate giants. The consequence of that was China did get an independent power in the internet, and it has its own independent mechanisms and controls over the internet itself, and over the facilities and tools that you have available to you in China. Now, they're just as good or better than those in the West, many of them. There was a case recently, maybe someone here can tell me what the name of the company was. You know, when TikTok was about to close down, then there was some Chinese Red something or other that people went to. It was an alternative very similar to TikTok. And suddenly, huge numbers of young people from America were in contact with huge numbers of young people from China. And a lot of people in China can talk English. And therefore, they discovered things about China that they didn't know, you know, because they've had this image presented to them, like many people here will have done, that China is a totalitarian state where everything's controlled by the government, the party's watching everything, and everyone's just repressed, you know. And I've been trying to counter this narrative, but of course, you know, practical realities for people are much more powerful than someone's argument. So, for example, many people who, that's right, the veil slipped away, many people who have been to China come back, even if they're, you know, whether they're pro-capitalist or anti-communist, or, you know, they come back and they say, well, it's nothing like what I thought it would be. And that certainly is true, that the more intercommunication between people, the less the propaganda machine can function effectively. And there is a massive propaganda machine. The propaganda machine is there because China's system, In other words, public ownership of the decisive levers of the economy, an economy that is planned and where the general welfare of the population is the primary concern. Now, the primary concern because the administrative bureaucracy and the party leadership want to stay in power, obviously, and also want to develop their country, and that's the main reasons why that takes place. Now, you can go on, as I said, each of these issues you can look at with Deepseek or with Chatgtp, and the best idea is to try and pose the same questions on both, and then see your responses. One of the funny things on the Deepseek one is that if you go on there, for example, I did the same question there. Could China establish communism by 2049? And then I said, how would it go about doing it? And then I said, how would a leader in China who believed in these ideas put them forward inside the party and gain traction? And when Deepseek answers something's not allowed to answer, or its train of thought, I'll use thought in inverted commas, it's process reasoning, when it reaches that point where the answer enters in the forbidden zone of the algorithms, then it just stops it and says, can we talk about something else? But it starts giving the answer. So I had to ask AI how to capture what the reply is as it begins to answer it, so that I can capture that element before it gets cut off. So I have got the means to do so. Chatgtp provided with the means to investigate that and to capture. Run a program, press a button, and it will capture the text that's coming as it comes to a reply that, for example, gets cut off. But you might get 2/3 of reply, and from that 2/3 you might have important pieces that you can run by it again and push the parameters. And in fact, sometimes it's better, it sounds a bit silly, but sometimes it's better when there are parameters there that you're bouncing off, and then you get a better, more comprehensive picture by encircling those parameters with questions and cross questions that will allow you to gain an understanding. Let me have a see what you've been saying here. I saw someone say something about social credit. Yeah. So here's another interesting thing. I looked up the whole social credit discussion because I did post something on Substack on my major articles about COVID-19 in China. I posted a thing on there about social credit systems in China, and I said, well, basically the idea that social credit was used as a mechanism for controlling people under the pandemic is not true. And I'd looked through various academic papers, but these academic papers, they tend to be produced 6 months to a year after the event, so and they might be influenced by stuff. So I went on the Deepseek and I asked the details of lockdown measures imposed in different areas, and also asked the details as to whether lockdowns were a component part of social credit system. And it gave quite good and honest responses. In some places, sort of almost the universal control that we were given the image of under lockdown, but nowhere was there this social credit used as the mechanism for controlling people, the Chinese people, under the lockdowns. And in fact, there are many measures that have been taken in privacy in China that are actually better than the measures in privacy here. One interesting thing that I did check up on that was the facial recognition technology. They reckoned, initially they tried to use facial recognition for sort of monitoring. They could in theory get 99% facial recognition skill. Then they had the masks, everyone was wearing a mask, so it became more difficult. But of course the companies are out for contracts, and so they made new technologies that can basically detect who you are based on the eyes, and they got about 95% recognition from that. 95% is still quite, still poor, but it's still a lot. So, and and then you need to if you get to this point where you're discussing with the Deepseek, for example, about this type of stuff, then you can go back to it and cross-question it. What's the social opposition to this?
How can you eliminate that? How do you present something that can prevent the facial recognition from functioning? How can you undermine it? How can you win support to defeat it, and so on and so forth? And so what I'm basically saying is we've got a Pandora's box has been opened, and that Pandora's box, the AI Pandora's box, can be used by the people as a means to establish a new type of society. It is, if you like, it's like having a wee army of secretaries and programmers at your disposal, provided you critically think about what you're doing, how you're doing. Now, of course, in the Western world, that tends to be like, how do I make some money or something like that. But if you're trying to investigate issues or ideas, and you want to go off in a terrain, into another dominion, investigate them, cross-question them, challenge them, make programs, web pages, videos, whatever else it is. And the point is, you can actually almost automate this. So you could, for example, if you wanted to make, I don't know, you wanted to organise a strike in Liverpool. You wanted to get to the point where you could call a general strike in Liverpool to overthrow the government in Liverpool. You could suggest such a thing. How might you get to that point? How might you organise for it? How might you produce materials to do so? How might you galvanise support? How could you judge whether you had sufficient support to do such a thing? You could produce a series. You could make a 5-year or 10-year plan to develop influence within the trade unions. You could produce documents and publications that are related to today, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time. You could produce videos that are connected with that. That costs a bit more money, though. If you want to start producing videos that are of high quality at the moment, you're talking about a lot of processing power involved, and therefore, you're talking about money. You're talking about like 20 quid to make a video or something like that. But nevertheless, you can produce a video with some of these artificial intelligence apps. But it's not bad. You basically you can put the text in you want in there, and then it will produce a video with reasonable stock footage, for example, for free. But if you want to have some AI footage that looks good and realistic and looks like a film, then you can pay for that a bit more money. But you could create movements that would, you could work out how to raise money to do a thing like that as well. As another friend of mine showed me the AI music stuff, so he put in some text and he was into salsa, so he put in some text and produced some music that will have a certain message associated with salsa. But you could put that in with the videos as well. So you see that the world is our oyster, provided we know how to use technology for the benefit of raising the living standards of the people and changing the power relations in society. Because we live in terrible times. We've got all these monstrosities around the world. You see these images from Gaza, the people sort of wandering. And the farcical thing is, when the Auschwitz story is in the news, the anniversary of Auschwitz, and then you see these ragged refugees wandering around in the ruins of a place that looks like Hiroshima, and that's the story of our time. On the other side, with AI, with drones and all the rest of it, you'd think they wanted this to become the means of warfare, but then you look at Ukraine and they're stuck in the trenches like the First World War, despite the new technology. So Elon Musk is brain. The funny thing is, the point is, how stupid do they look? Here we have the geeks that we've been told are so brilliant. Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos in his day, and all the other geeks. They got Sam Altman, and they spent hundreds of billions. The capitalists in the West have spent hundreds of billions, invested hundreds. Microsoft and others were buying nuclear power plants to power the computing power that they thought they would need in order to run these AI systems. And now they've been outstripped by a company that costs no more than 5 or 6 houses in London. It's a farce. And in that sense, it is a Sputnik. And the important component of that is the open source information, because because computers, or the early stage of the internet, for example, was based primarily on open source data. Basically, open source is a building block. So the building block is this. I want to build on top of this angle. I build something on top of this finger here, but it's all known. So each part you can go back and deconstruct it and reconstruct it. So it makes an infinitely mutable tool out of the software. Whereas all the proprietary software, Microsoft and Google and all the rest of it, all that, it doesn't allow you out of their parameters, and therefore it's a self-controlled, if you like, a feudal prison in software terms. And despite the Chinese government's forbidden words, I put something about what would Xi Jinping say. Let's talk about something else. But you could say instead, what would a leader in China say, or what should a leader, or in a hypothetical scenario that there were a leader in China who's, that's the way. So that's the way around it. It's very easy. And of course, the Chinese people themselves have been doing that for the best part of nearly 2 decades since the internet emerged in China. They've already been doing that already. So don't underestimate how the consciousness of the mass is there, and the consciousness of the people here, if thinking people everywhere will have critical attitudes towards power and the use of power. And I'm going to finish on this point because I've been rambling quite a lot, but I'm trying to give you an idea of the type of things I'm looking at, and invite you to participate in these type of activities, because I'm going to be going off in these different spheres and presenting you with all this, and it's going to become a lot more condensed. The work I'm going to be talking about we did start with the Santa Rebellion, but that was on the internet. We did and that's also true, to get a power cut, but that's also true, of course. You could get a power cut that chops you off, although you got generators and you got solar power and all that sort of thing, so you could sort of function. And at the grass, as long as you're still doing stuff that is based upon the same principles, then you can do those things without these machines. So I was going to finish on this point. Bertolt Brecht referred to the need for revolutionary consciousness to develop amongst the working classes, and he said these are the children of the scientific age. Children of the scientific age. And I remember as a kid, there were people in my own street. It was quite a working class community. It was Worcester Park, South London, suburban community. But I remember one of my mates from up the street from school. He was always learning. His dad was a bus driver, a bit of a reactionary, but his dad was a bus driver, and he used to teach him all about engineering and how to take his car apart and all that sort. I never knew anything about that. It was more, my life was a bit more esoteric. My mum was into art. My dad was in computing. But this guy, he knew how to take a car apart. He would make a go-kart and all these sort of science. And when it got chemistry, he was really good at that. So the working classes have that consciousness, and even though it's dumbed out of them and knocked out of them by the establishment, by the ruling classes, who like to make out they're so frigging clever, in reality, the working classes are the foundation for creating a new society. And I'm quite confident that they'll be able to use artificial intelligence for their own purposes and to make a better world for all of us. Okay, that's enough for now. I've been rambling around. I wanted to give you sort of, I've been thinking about this for a while, but I didn't want to structure it. I just want to give you a bit of raw thought processes that are going on, what the background to them is, so that you can begin to, so those who've seen this video will begin to understand where I'm going to. But I'll repeat some of these thematics again, and there'll start to be more focused videos on specific subject matters that related to the themes I've raised today. Thanks very much for being here. See you again. Do share the video around. Do recommend to others, and I'll be starting another channel soon as well to focus more on these type of questions, because this channel has, as you will be able to notice, this channel has got serious algorithm problems, which unfortunately, well, that's great, isn't it? You see, people who don't know how to do that even now, the wired plug Benny Hill. Thanks very much, you guys. It's a pleasure.